Welcome everybody, welcome to Douglas Elliman. We're at the Miami office of Douglas Elliman Real Estate. It's January 2019 and we're going to go over opportunity funds. As we move through this, one thing that's very important to keep in mind is that the law is changing on a rapid pace. So the U.S. Treasury is supposed to come out with new updates, so information that you learn here today could change and shift a bit, and it seems like it's going to become more favorable over time. So by March, there'll be updates to this that if you're working with opportunity funds, you're going to need to stay on top of it and understand them. And I'll kind of highlight where those changes come in as we go forward. But with opportunity funds, as realtors, we're going to try to get through a couple of different goals, which is learning how to protect yourself as you work with your clients, and also understanding the basics, and more importantly, how we make money as realtors doing and helping our clients with opportunity zones. So protecting yourself, there are CPAs and attorneys out there that know this stuff like the back of their hand, and working with them and making those connections are going to help you close more deals. And the reason why I say that is if your client feels like they're being led in a direction that might not be consistent with what the law is, and they don't have a trust of what we're sharing with them, they may be reticent to close that deal. So this hopefully will give everybody enough information about opportunity funds to make your client feel comfortable that you're knowledgeable enough to help them do the deal. So what is opportunity funds and opportunity zones? This is something that comes from laws that were passed in 2017. In the year in December, Congress passed and Trump signed some Obama-era legislation that was started but adapted to help the markets move money from all sorts of appreciated assets into real estate. These are the basic laws that rule that, and if you Google those and look at those, it will help get you the information you need. These have been in the tax code for a long time, but it's this on top of these that regulate everything about opportunity zones. This is just procedural background. To understand opportunity zones is to understand what was the intent of the legislation. The legislation is tax driven and it's development or business oriented. So when looking at investments in opportunity zones, you're looking at either buying property, real estate, or a business. And that's the great thing, is it's just not property. We do businesses and opportunity zones. But the goal is to create economic development and job creation within those areas that are designated as opportunity zones. So they're targeting distressed communities. The areas in each state was designated by the governor and approved by the U.S. Treasury. So those are already set and fixed. Could they change over a 10-year period? They probably could, and it's something to look forward to if it does change. So definitions, opportunity funds, opportunity zones, what are they, right? So an opportunity fund is an investment vehicle. And we're going to talk about what those investment vehicles are as we go forward. But basically, it's a vehicle in which you can move capital gains from appreciated assets. So it's capital gains into a fund, right? And this is important because it's different than other capital gains we'll talk about. Regular money can be invested as well, but at the end of the day, it doesn't get the benefits of being invested like your capital gains do. But you'll find out you might need this money to make a deal happen. So qualified opportunity funds, money that's in a fund that goes into qualified opportunity zones. The zones are the designated areas where those properties are designated as qualified to make these investments, which those are the economically disadvantaged areas. So again, it's not just real estate, it's also businesses. Okay. So what are the benefits of the law on a high level? What are the benefits of an opportunity zone? Capital gains, right? There's two types of money. There's money that you put into the opportunity fund, and there's the money that you make in the opportunity fund. And it's very easy to get confused between capital gains when we're talking about them, because just like a CPA you're going to want to rely on, you want to know what type of capital gains you're talking about. So the benefits are, if you sell an appreciated asset and put the money in the fund and you invest it in real estate, there's a reduction in that capital gains. So you're getting a benefit. Additionally, you don't have to pay that capital gain until some point in the future, which is great because you're making money on deferred tax payments, okay? So then you put your money into the fund and you're making money. So you're making capital gains on that money. This is this money. And if you have that invested for a certain period of time, those gains, you have the opportunity to pay possibly nothing. So that's pretty impactful. It's huge, okay? So what are the sources of the capital gains that can go into an opportunity fund? These are examples. but basically any appreciated asset that's qualified under the tax law. So someone could sell stock, bonds, other real estate, take the money out of 1031 exchanges, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Taxable portions of a gain from the sale of your home, and how that works is if you this is a little intricate. When you sell your home, there's like a $250,000 deduction as an individual, or as a couple, a $500,000 deduction or a hurdle. So let's say you bought a home for $500,000, you sold it for $1.5 million. There's $1 million in gain. If you're a married couple, the first $500,000 is not taxable. That next $500,000 is. That taxable $500,000 gain from the sale of your primary residence can go into an opportunity fund. It's huge. Okay. And if you sell a company or company stock, all those gains can go into an opportunity fund. So this opens it up to be very, very broad, and it can touch all of us and every single one of our clients. Okay, so it's good that you're here to understand this. A key figure to know about is that 180 days from the sale of that asset, that money has to be in an opportunity fund. Not necessarily the property, but in the opportunity fund.
How long?
180 days. And we'll go over these numbers a little bit later. So it's, as we go through this, it can be confusing, but you have to understand the difference and keep in mind opportunity fund and opportunity zone property, and when that money has to move between the two. Okay? So what are the tax benefits? We'll go a little bit deeper, and as a recap. So let's say you put capital gains into the fund. You sold, let's say, Blackstone stock, right? And you put it into this fund, you get a reduction. If you hold that money in the fund and in that property for 5 years, you decrease the taxable base by 10%. So you're decreasing the tax you owe by 10%. If you've held it 7 years, you potentially decrease that by 15%. So let's say you have a $500,000 gain, your tax rate is 40%. What is that? $200,000? Do you have $200,000 in tax? So if you reduce that by 10%, now you're only paying, what, $180,000 in tax? So you start to reduce the amount of money you owe, just as an example, okay? So this is money going in. Also on the money that goes in, you owe taxes, but because you put it into a qualified opportunity fund, you don't have to pay that for up to the sooner of 10 years or December 31st, 26. They extended the law since this came out, so now it's good up through 2026 to make these kind of investments. So whenever you put that money in, as long as it's in there for 10 years, you can defer the payment of that capital gain for 10 years. Okay? So you owe the money, it reduces over time, and you don't have to pay it for up to 10 years. Okay? So now, you put this money in, and you're making money. Let's say you put in $500,000 a gain, and let's say you make $500,000 a gain. That $500,000 of extra money that you made in there, as long as it's held for the 10 years, that money, capital gain made, you don't owe any tax on. It's pretty good, right? So far, is everybody following?
So, if you were not to put the capital gain money in the opportunity zone, and you put your own money in, you don't, what's the difference?
You don't get the benefit of anything on that. Zero. So there's another category that I didn't put here, which is just, let's say you put in $500,000 in capital gains, and you put in $500,000 of just regular money. That money gets no benefit of this, because what they're trying to do is incentivize people to take their capital gains, by giving you a tax benefit, to put it into areas of economic disadvantage to help gentrify that area. Okay? But many times you might need to, Dean, put that money in there on top of the capital gains, regular money, to make a deal work. And I'm going to give you some examples of how that happens in a minute. So hold that thought. So this sounds great, right? All these benefits the government's giving us to get this investment sounds great. But there's a caveat, there's a catch, and it's not as simple as that. There's something called the substantial improvement requirement, which says that when you make this money investment into these areas, this is not a passive investment. They want you to improve things. They want you to develop. They want you to rehabilitate. They want you to start a business and grow the business in this area. Right now, there's a 50% substantial improvement requirement. When the law first came out, it was 100%. What does this mean? What it means is if I buy a $500,000 property, I have to put in 50% of that value, $250,000 in improvements. This is where it's tricky, and this is where as a realtor we have to be savvy. If we're going to queue up a pitch to a client on a property, you have to be able to demonstrate to them how that additional $250 makes economic sense for that investment. How are they going to get a return on that money? Okay, so that's the trick. So when you look at all the different types of properties you can invest in, land is the easiest to meet this metric. Because when you develop land, let's say you buy a lot for $250,000, well, it's going to easily cost you that to build a duplex on it, right? So that's easy. It's if you're pitching a $5 million office building, you've got to show possibly $2.5 million of improvements that need to go in there to comply with this law.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. So what that means is that that property is going to need a lot of work, and you should be looking for properties that need a lot of work. For example, this property is bought for somewhere around $2 million. This is a value add play, right? And this is a great example. They put in easily $2 million. They more than met the substantial requirement. Now this property was bought before the Opportunity Zone law came into effect, but if they had bought it now and done that same thing, all the gain that they would get when they sell this building would have been qualified under this as long as they held it for 10 years, right? So this building now is easily worth $10 million. Okay, so there's an example of how that can be put together. Things that are also important to know, there's a lot of information, is that remember you have to put the money from the sale of a gain into a fund within 180 days. It doesn't have to immediately go into the property, and this is where it really gets tricky. You actually have about 30 months to deploy that money if you do it right. But here's how you do it right. You have to show every year from the time that money's put into the fund a plan or a property or a contract showing that at least 90% of the money that you put into this opportunity fund is or will be invested in and will have improved a property over a 30-month period. But 90% of it has to be in opportunity zones, opportunity zone properties.
So just by showing the 30 months, that you have this plan, that you have this location?
Yes, and this is why it's important to work with a CPA. That's exactly right, Paul. But that's why it's important to work with a CPA. So here's an example. Let's say I buy this piece of land that's across the street, and I'm going to develop 50 apartment units on it. It's a vacant piece of land. Well, development cycle can take 2 to 3 years. So when I put the money in the opportunity fund, I could have a contract in place to close within a year, and I could have the whole development analysis certified by my CPA. Contract plus plan plus money in the fund shows that if that's in the opportunity zone, you qualify. Okay, so you can see how this gets a little tricky, and you as a realtor kind of have to think through, how can I help my client understand this so they can plan this out? Okay, but it also opens it up for investments in huge developments. If it was just 180 days you had to be in a property, it would really limit what you could get into. So that 30-month period helps, and there is enough leeway that if they blow past that 30 months, as long as you have that plan every year documenting it, and showing that that money's 90% tagged for being in, and showing how it's going to be improved and delivered, it'll work. But again, you really have to work with your CPA. I can say that, but there can be certain things that your investor does that disqualifies them. So it's kind of tricky. Okay? So that's really deep detail. That caveat's really important to know. Let's step back and just go over timing and numbers that matter. So 180 days is from the sale of your asset. Let's say I sell GE and I made $100,000. So I have 180 days to put it into a qualified fund. And we'll go over what that is a little bit later. You have up to 30 months more or less to meet your substantial improvement requirement. But what that means is that initially right away you have to have a plan in place that's certified by your CPA showing how that works. Because within that first year you still have to show you're either owning or have the plans to own or have the ownership plus the plans to make that substantial improvement of that additional 50%. There's that 90% asset test that I just talked about, which is you have to 90% of your funds have to be invested in qualified opportunity properties within the fund. 50% is the additional investment you need. About a year ago, the U.S. Treasury estimated that the money that's going to flow into, the capital gains that's going to flow into opportunity funds at $100 billion across the nation. Puerto Rico and all the islands. And all the territories of the United States also have qualified opportunity zones. Miami Herald article just about a month ago estimated at about $1 trillion it's going to fall in there. So it's huge. And a lot of your clients are going to be asking about it if they haven't already, but I'm also going to talk to you about how you can be rainmakers and get out there and try to get ahead of this to try to get investors or get listings to capture some of this money flow, okay? Sure.
So you have 180 days to transfer the funds.
From the sale
From the
to
sale.
a fund.
Then you have 30 months to find the property or to identify a property.
So within the first year, you have to show that you either own, like that money that went in there, 90% of it either has to be in a property, have a contract that's going to close on a property, and if that's the case, a development plan of how that money's going to be allocated so that we continue to meet that 90% investment.
Can it be more than one property, like a 1031?
As long as all the money is 90% invested in properties that are in opportunity zones, it
Or
qualifies.
can you do like 3 identified properties and you're going to close on one of them? As opposed to...
Yes, but don't get hung up on 1031 exchange language. You could, as part of that plan, you could have as many properties as you want, as long as there's like, I think once or twice a year, you have to certify with your CPA that where 90% of the money is, right? And 90% of the money has to be allocated for or in properties with development plans. Okay? And you don't necessarily have to understand that detail because your CPA will help out with that a lot, but you just know that the basic level, if you can speak to that, you can help your client along. Once they start trying to ask more detailed questions than that, just say, look, you really need to talk to your CPA at this point, okay? But let me show you where qualified opportunity properties are that kind of make sense, okay? I'm here to help you guys as well. I would love to do deals with you, and that's why I'm kind of sharing all this knowledge that I've been studying up on. So, you know, offline we can try to work with that if you have a specific scenario, maybe I'll know it. Okay.
So this would only work as a tax deferral for 1031?
If you wanted to get out, so let's talk about 1031 exchanges. 1031 exchanges, the only way that you can get out of a 1031 exchange before this law and not pay taxes is to die. And then your kids, your beneficiaries, would get the stepped up basis at 0, so they wouldn't owe any tax on that, right? So there's a lot of people that would really like to have use of that money today, but they don't want to take the full hit of the capital gains tax, right? So this is a vehicle that Congress has created to help incentivize people to come out of 1031 exchanges. And I'll tell you what, in the summer of 2017, if you followed politics, Congress was actually debating getting rid of and ending 1031 exchanges. And you know, there's a lot of problems with 1031 exchanges I can go into offline, but the only way to do that is incentivize people. And this is a great way, right? So you have appreciated assets in 1031 exchange. If you bust that, you pay full taxes. But if you roll those gains in here, you're at least reducing it by up to 15%, and you're still making money on your money, so it transitions it, and it's less painful.
It's important to note, I think, too, that you can use gains from the sale of stock,
Yes.
which you really couldn't do. You have to pay the tax
Correct.
when you sell a gain in your stock, and there's
Correct.
no 1031 for stock.
Correct. That's exactly it. And you know, and I think if you can get your CPA to certify artwork or other things like that as an appreciated asset, there may be ways to kind of like involve that as well. The other reason why this is huge is a lot of large funds in Wall Street are raising gains from people selling stock and aggregating it to help make these kinds of investments. And just like back in 2009, 10, 11, when you saw huge hedge funds come in here and try to buy up all the foreclosures, these funds are getting ready to come in here and try to position themselves in qualified properties in opportunity zones.
Aren't they already doing it in Liberty City?
Everywhere.
I know.
Everywhere. So going on, let's just as another recap investment flow, okay? So sell an asset, for example, like let's say sell property in 1030 exchange, Tom. You have 180 days to move that capital gain money into an opportunity fund. And you can put other money in that fund, and you can put a loan into that fund. And the reason why I bring these up is, let's say you buy a property for $1 million, and you only have $300,000 in capital gains to buy that property with. So you put the $300,000 in here, put down 20%, $200,000, you get the loan for the difference, but what do you do with that other $100,000? You need to be able to improve that $1 million property by $500,000 at least, right? So you're borrowing, or you're taking on another investor. That other investor could be sold partnership shares for another $500,000 to improve it. It could be an additional loan. The partnership shares, if you sold that as equity and they had capital gains that they were using, they now start to benefit from that same tax treatment of an opportunity zone. Okay? If you take the loan in, that money doesn't get the benefit, but it's money you need to do the deal, right? So that doesn't get the tax deferral, that doesn't get the tax-free, but you're really trying to focus on saving the taxes on your capital gain.
But you can still write off your taxes.
On the loan portion, right?
Yeah.
So qualified opportunity fund, within the fund, right, this is just a vehicle for making investment, now you need to purchase your property. So property inside of a qualified zone, money that goes into the qualified fund that buys the property, okay? So to make sure that's clear, because we're going to go over where these zones and properties are, and also how to do this to create the fund as we go forward a little bit. So before we talk about properties that go into it, what's not qualified? What can't you put your money into? For obvious reasons, all the sin activities they're trying to avoid. I put a caveat on this, private or commercial golf course. A lot of developers are buying golf courses and doing developments because they have nice water.
Multi-family everywhere, and they're getting sued by our state. I'm so happy.
Sure. So with that, if they're buying it to operate as a golf course, it doesn't qualify. But if you're doing it as a development play to build, then that'll qualify. The CPA can set that up so it qualifies. Okay. So just something to keep in mind. So agents, how can we make money? There's two ways. Either network and find a buyer, or get listings, right? So who in your sphere do you know qualifies as a high net worth individual who may have capital gains? Somehow start a conversation about this. Network. Family offices with private wealth funds, they're out there. Network. Broker dealers are creating funds. Make connections to them. Find out what they're looking for. Maybe you can find it. Public-private pensions that are looking to invest in real estate. How many of your clients have a 1031 exchange that they'd like to get out of? Low-income housing tax credits, those developers, housing credit programs, people who are looking to buy Section 8 houses, they buy a deplorable house, fix it up, take a Section 8 tenant. And then technology and energy tax credit companies are looking to buy in areas, develop their company, and have their headquarters there. Was it Amazon that just moved their headquarters to New Jersey, New York? Interestingly enough, they bought in an opportunity zone. So they're going to take advantage of this, and as a business and as a real estate play, get all of those benefits in the future. Okay. So network, be an alpha, go out and get it. The other way is get listings. So we're going to go over where the qualified zones are. Go out, farm. The whole point of a realtor is pick a farm area, canvass it, get to know the owners, get the listings. And you want to be careful with this because a typical conversation is if you tell them about opportunity zones, which you kind of do tell them this is something that benefits their area, they might get this pie-in-the-sky expectation that their value's gone up huge, but it hasn't. The property's only worth what an economically viable development, rehab, or reposition would be, right? So if they have this office building, they're not going to sell it for $10 million if they haven't done the work and if they haven't raised rents that support it. So you also have to help them understand that just because it's in an opportunity zone is not necessarily more beneficial to them as the seller unless they do these improvements, but why would they? They're not going to get that benefit, right? Because they can't go out and buy their own property for themselves. Okay? So things to look for are apartment buildings where the rents are so under market that...
What do you mean you can't go out and buy them for yourself?
So you can't buy it for yourself. So if I own property in an opportunity zone, I can't sell it to my own company and participate in this with the capital gains because that's just fraud and the law says you can't do it. So it has to be an arm's length transaction and sale. So you can sell to Richard, but you can't sell to a company or an LLC that you own to try to do this.
That's interesting, because I was just thinking.
Yeah.
I'll stop thinking.
There you go. So that's basically it. But value add plays, this building's a great example of value add play. Land for development. Those are things that are really going to be easy for people to get over. If someone has to build a headquarters or a building, that's going to work as well. So we've been talking a lot about qualified opportunity funds. Your client's probably going to ask you, how do I create a fund? Well, funds are as easy as a single member LLC, but you really need to work with a CPA on how to set it up, how to qualify, and how to make sure you don't cause yourself problems with the IRS, right? So you could, for example, you can create an LLC, but you're either going to need to declare it as a partnership or corporation, or you can create a complex vehicle called a real estate investment trust where you're taking money from a bunch of investors. Again, speak to an attorney and CPA about how to set it up. I just want you to know how that works. It's not as daunting as it may sound when you talk about funds, because like Danny can go out and open up Danny Hernandez LLC, file as a single member corporation, and go out with capital gains from the sale of the stock, have that money in that fund, and buy a property, as long as he's not buying his own property. Does that make sense? Okay. So what can they invest in? This is what's really great. Once you have that money in Qualified Opportunity Zone, you can invest in the stock of Quality Opportunity Zone funds. So let's say you created your own fund, and someone comes along and says, hey, I have a property that I bought with my fund. You can invest in their fund. You have beneficial ownership of the property. So that's one way to invest in Qualified Opportunity Zones. We don't do stock sales. So again, you need an attorney and a CPA, right? So you can buy the partnerships. If it's a partnership, if they sell partnership shares, you can buy that. And you can buy the tangible property or assets of a business that's in an opportunity zone, okay? There's some initial filing forms. These are draft forms. These are the forms that are used today. Really, this is a conversation for your CPA, but just know that once you start your fund, you have to file the annual tax form 8949 to show that this is a deferral of capital gains into a fund. And then there's an initial form here that you file also initially saying that you're making an investment in property, and you refile that on an ongoing basis to prove that that 90% asset test is made. Okay? So, again, a little bit more than you need, but at least you know the mechanics of what your investor is going to need to do to be able to participate. So, we went over qualified opportunity funds. The question is where are these opportunity zones? Where are these properties? I've done 3 screenshots of maps here from a website, and I'll give you guys that website. But I just want to kind of highlight and kind of like spark some ideas. This is Miami, right? So Hollywood, downtown Miami, Brickell. For example, this whole strip is Airport West Warehouse District. If you have an investor who's looking to develop a warehouse, great area to look. Miami Gardens, maybe there's large tracts of land for commercial or residential development. This is Edgewater, west of Biscayne. This all the way down to the river is Alapata and Liberty City, downtown Miami. Huge heavy density zoning in this area. What's interesting is this is the area around Aventura Mall. Okay, so huge tract west of I-95 in Hallandale, Hollywood, and in Fort Lauderdale between the city and World Manors and 95. This whole area here, which is pretty rough when you drive through, okay?
It is?
Yeah. So what's interesting is the governor set this up. It was set up a long time ago. So, you know, Alapata, Lemon City, and Brickell downtown got hot before this happened. So, you know, 10 years ago if this had happened, there would be a lot of very happy developers using capital gains in these areas. This is zoomed out really far. When you go in here, you can get down to the property level. You can really zoom in, okay? So you just have to play around with it. I just wanted to give you a perspective here. Miami downtown, Homestead. Almost all of Homestead is an opportunity zone. Okay? So obviously the state, for some reason, wants Homestead to really build out. You know, I guess that is the pivot point between the Keys and Miami. Danny, you know.
Palmetto Bay, what is that?
Hold on one second. Danny, you know these areas here. Those are like the economic disadvantaged areas down the Color Bay. Brickell, something.
Richmond Heights.
Richmond Heights. So Richmond Heights. This little pocket here in Coral Gables is really interesting. If you have a developer that wants to buy land and develop duplexes, it's kind of been the thing in the South Grove area, Carter Street, Ohio Street, that whole area. That's kind of like the less secure area of the Grove. That model would work real well. You know, if you have a builder of duplexes, like they buy a piece of land for $250, $300, and they build 2 luxury townhomes that they sell for $550 each, more than qualifies. That's a great play.
I have a question. If that's that scenario, if the developer sold it, he wouldn't, don't you have to hold it?
You have to hold it.
Okay,
But that's a great thing.
Okay.
From the CPAs and accountants who are sending questions into the U.S. Treasury about how this works, they are getting the read and believe that the next iteration, it's going to go from you having to hold the property 10 years to as long as you're either in the fund or going between funds, and always between the funds or in the fund, It could go from a hold of 10 years to rolling through properties as long as you're 90% invested per the plan, etc. So, you know, it's one of these things. This started January 1st, 2018, and money's been very slow to come in. Those investors who like to run with scissors were the first ones in, and they'll just figure it out as they go, right? But as we go through 2019 and towards the end of it, you're going to see a huge amount of demand. Everybody's going to be talking about it, and a huge amount of money just flowing in by that time, right? Because there's going to be more and more clarity and that kind of flexibility coming through, okay? So I also wanted to show you from Fort Lauderdale up to West Palm Beach where our office is covered. There's a huge area of West Palm. If anybody works West Palm, if you can find tracts of land for development, or let's say an apartment building that's just, let's say it's a apartment building in a housing program, but you can lift the restrictions and it needs a couple $1 million of capital improvement, and you can raise the rents to market after you take the program off. If you can find those in that area, you got a winner, okay? Just some prospecting ideas. You can pick all these areas for prospecting. When you get the link, you'll see it's all highlighted. You just keep zooming into areas, and you can go property by property, call, prospect, get the listing, get the listing. This is around Lake Okeechobee. That was just in the picture when I grabbed it. So here's some resource links. If you guys email me, I'll email you the screenshot, so that way you guys can look through these as well. Great articles and resources, and this is the actual link I used to show you those. Okay. Here we got the screenshot. So my name is Brian Carter. I work with WSL Real Estate. I do commercial real estate. Let's do some deals together. And I want to give you a couple examples of some deals down here that I have listed that maybe we could do together. Let's take the small one, because I think most people think of big deals when they think of this. I have a house listed at 1825 Northwest 52nd Street. I did the comps. That house, fixed up, pristine condition, rented out at market, would be a 7 cap, number one, but also worth about $200,000, $210,000. It needs about $50,000 improvement, and I know you can buy this for $130,000. So you buy it for $130,000, put in $50,000, $60,000, you meet that 50% requirement for substantial improvement, you have a great hold. For now, you might have to hold it for 10 years, but if you're getting a 7 cap, that would be great, right? So here's something you can buy for $130,000, put in 60, hold the income, right? So that one's available if you're interested, email me on it. A development site, 4901 Northwest 17th Street. It's in an opportunity zone. It's just a little over an acre of land. Zone T3, T50. You can build 51 units on it. So, but you can do retail as well. So you buy it. It's asking $1 million. Let's say you get it for $900,000. When you go to develop on that, you're definitely going to spend more than $500,000 to build on that. But again, another great play that's available. Email me if you want more details. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for people who are looking to buy in opportunity zones, or people who have listings in opportunity zones. If you know people who own large tracts of land that can be developed for 500, 600, 700 units, or a mid-sized building that can be developed for 8 to 20 units, or even small vacant land for houses, duplex, and multifamily development, let's talk. Let's see if we can bring a buyer and a seller together. And as agents, if you want to take advantage of opportunity zones, prospect the areas, get the listings, understand how it can work. Not every property in opportunity zone will qualify, because if you can't do that substantial improvement, you're not going to get the benefits, right? Or reach into your Rolodex, start to network with people, get to find people who have 1031 exchanges. That's the easiest thing you can do, who want to sell and get out, and then go buy in an opportunity zone if they actually want to break out of their 1031 exchange. Or people who have lots of capital gains because they just happen to sell, 1 million shares of Blackstone, something like that. So there's 2 great ways for us to make money with it. I've given everybody the basic knowledge that you need to keep yourself out of trouble and at least sound like an expert when you're talking to your client. Again, I encourage you to find a CPA who knows this stuff very well, a title attorney to close with who knows it very well. And I'm here available as a resource, but more than anything, I'd love to do business with you and help close some of these deals. Thanks for coming, everybody.